Today we're going to be looking at the sorts of questions you get on the exam that relate to what you have learnt in Chapter 4. Now, Chapter 4 is in many ways a continuation of Chapter 3. In Chapter 3, you are looking at how writers use effects to create meaning in literature. And in Chapter 4, we're focusing a little bit more on non-fiction, but again, how do writers create effects? The overlap between fiction and non-fiction is quite considerable, and so much of what you learnt in Chapter 3 will apply to questions that you will be asked about non-fiction, and so on. So this will be apparent in the sort of questions you are asked, and when we come to look at the mark scheme. And the paper I'm going to look at today is the January paper from 2020. Here it is, and let's have a quick look at what it looks like inside. So, as you will recall, on paper 1 there is an unseen passage, and then there is a piece from Anthology A, a piece of non-fiction from Anthology A. And these two passages, the unseen and the piece from Anthology A, will be linked in some way thematically, as you will come to see. So let's have a look at what they have as the unseen passage. You can find these papers online, but I have put them here with screenshots, so you can do stills of the screenshots and print them if you want, or go online if that's easier for you to find the original paper. This unseen passage is called Survival at Sea, and it's about a man who falls overboard into the Indian Ocean when he was on a boat with some friends, and it's incredibly exciting. You know, even if you're not going to do the exam, I do recommend reading it. It's a very, very exciting account, and it goes on for 3 pages. As you can see here, it's diarised. He writes what time events are happening and what days it happens, because it went on for a while. So as you can see, it goes down to the 21st hour of this agony. And then finally, after 29 hours in the water, he's rescued. Spoiler alert. This is compared with a piece from Anthology A, and I think from memory it's the one about the between a rock and a hard place. So let's have a look at what the question looks like. It's it's question number 4, and it is. The first question you'll be asked is not about the unseen passage, although you'll be asked that in questions 1, 2 and 3. But for question 4, you'll be asked about between a rock and a hard place, and you'll be asked to show how the writer uses language and structure to convey the difficulties that he faces. In question 4, it's always about language and structure. Okay, don't forget to say something about structure, because it's easily overlooked. This is worth 12 marks, which is not inconsiderable, and I think you're given 2 sides to write, but yet again, don't expect to fill the 2 sides unless you've got incredibly big handwriting. They just put enough paper there so that you don't have to ask for any more paper. It's very likely that you'll write a page or a page and a half, probably about a page and a half. For this question, you should support your answer with close reference to the text, including brief quotations. Okay, so let's have a look at what the mark scheme says about what comprises a good answer to this question. Here's the mark scheme grid for question number 4. Reward responses that explain and analyse how the writer uses language and structure to convey the difficulties that he faces. It's worth mentioning here that yes, you're looking for language and structure, but remain focused on the title of the essay. Here it is, the difficulties that he faces. It could have been something else, given that both these narrators face extreme difficulties. I don't know what else they would have put, but there will be some focus to the essay, and make sure you're just not writing about language and structure generally, excuse me, but that you're showing how the writer uses language and structure to convey the difficulties. The sort of things that you could write, or that he uses the present tense, which creates a sense of urgency and emergency. You'll remember learning about tenses in Chapter 3. Measurements are given to show the difficulty of the drop-off and calculates the height. Adjective, claustrophobic. Contrast of verbs. Explaining that techniques that might be used to cross the gap are sometimes possible. Colloquial analogy. All these things are a mix of the sort of effects you'd have read about in chapters 3 and 4. So when you're answering this question, a little bit of what you learnt in chapter 3 and a little bit of what you learnt in chapter 4. Chapter 4 is specifically about media non-fiction, and you'll find it applies particularly if you get a passage that's taken from the media, like explorers or boys messing about. Let's see what the grid says. Yet more. It's always worth, when you're doing past papers, to look at the mark scheme. And it's worth mentioning here that the mark scheme, it describes, I don't know, maybe 60 different things that you can write. And obviously you don't have to write them all in your answer. You couldn't, you wouldn't have time. But this is a guide for the examiner. It's not for you. So if you do an exam paper and look at the mark scheme and you haven't put everything, don't worry about it. What the chief examiner is trying to do is to show all the hundreds of examiners around the country that are marking papers the sort of thing that could be mentioned, so that they can give a fair mark. Again, you have to reward all valid points, and the points that you make might not be on this mark scheme, but that doesn't matter. An experienced examiner would be able to reward what you've put, even if it's not on the list, if it's relevant. Here we just see the grades, level 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, the marks to be awarded, and where the what you have to do to get those marks. It's always worth looking at the first adjective in this grid. For the lowest level, it's basic identification of effects, then some understanding and use of language, and then clear understanding and explanation, then thorough understanding and exploration of language, and for the top grade, it's perceptive understanding. So you're giving that little bit extra to your answer that shows that you have a bit of insight into what the writer is doing. Question 5, I cover this, I think, adequately in the course materials, so I won't spend too much time on describing how to answer a comparison question here, but question 5 is the comparison question, and it's worth noticing it's 22 marks, which is a lot of marks. It's about a quarter of the whole of paper 1. Once again, I've mentioned it before, but the arrangement of questions in this paper can be deceptive. It begins with very short questions, for which there are 2, 4 and 5 marks available. Then it leaps up to 12 marks for question 4, which you've just looked at. Then it leaps up further to 22 marks here. And the last question, which comprises half the marks of the paper, is worth 45 marks. So allow a lot of time to answer this question. It's a comparison question, so you're looking at the survival at sea extract that I just indicated to you where it is, and also between a rock and a hard place. It usually follows the same format. It says, compare how the writers present their ideas and perspectives about their experiences. If you look at past papers, it more or less always says the same sort of thing. They don't focus on something such as the difficulties of their experience, as they did in question 4. It's usually a bit more general, to give you plenty of scope to show what you can find and how to present it. Again, support your answer with detailed examples from both texts, including brief quotations. Once again, I know I've said it before, so apologies for being boring, but don't write general things such as such and such a sentence creates an image in your mind. Well, most writing creates an image in your mind, and that's very general. Hone it down and be more specific. Let's look at what the mark scheme says. Okay. Reward responses that compare the writer's experiences and the ways in which they present their ideas and perspectives. Responses may include the following points. Both extracts are first-person accounts. Both writers use a serious tone throughout. It's worth mentioning, be alert to the tone of a piece. It's often overlooked. Sometimes you can find two pieces that mainly the difference is that one is in a serious tone and one is in a comedic tone, so be alert to the tone of a piece. Both writers describe their feelings of being in pain. Both writers find themselves alone and with no immediate help. So there's some pretty obvious points of comparison here between the two texts if you read them. And again, the mark schemes, the grading says level 1, the response does not compare the texts, so missing the point entirely, but you can still get a few marks. Level 2 is 5 to 8 marks out of a possible 22, and it's worth noting that candidates who have considered only one text may only achieve a mark up to the top of level 2. So if you come out of the exam and you think, oh heck, I hadn't realised that was a comparison question, I had a bit of a meltdown, I only wrote about one text, you will still get some marks, so don't worry about it too much. It's not a brilliant thing to have done, but you won't get no marks, which I think is quite generous on the part of the exam board. And so it goes on. The level 3, the response considers a range of comparisons. Level 4, the response considers a wide range of comparisons. Level 5, the response considers a varied and comprehensive range of comparisons between the texts. Excuse me. It's worth mentioning that if you want to get the higher marks, do try to pick up a variety of similarities and differences between the texts. So don't just write, for example, about the writer's experiences, write about the use of language and write about the structure, so you're making a range of points of comparison, and that will get you the higher marks. Great, well I think that is all I wanted to say about that particular question. We've covered 2 questions, haven't we? And I hope it's useful. As always, any questions, drop me a line, pick up the phone, and I'll do my very best to help.